Before I begin, a little disclaimer: I have not actually read the Bridgerton books, nor do I have a desire to. From what I hear, many of the issues I take with the show are actually much worse in the books, and I just don't have the energy to slog through that when I could be off reading books I actually like. Therefore, all of my commentary here is going to be based solely off of the events of the show. Also, there will be spoilers for all 3 seasons, and I will be discussing some disturbing topics, including SA and reproductive abuse. So just be forewarned. I have a love-hate relationship with the show Bridgerton. On one hand, it is a romance series, my favorite genre, and even better, it's a romance series popular enough to have made it into mainstream culture, which is a refreshing change at a time when so many pieces of media have been avoiding romance plotlines like the plague. I love the Regency-era setting, I love the costumes, the music choices, and I like most of the characters to one extent or another. On the other hand, though, Bridgerton is also very much a pro-natalist fantasy that has pushed some very harmful messages, and nowhere is that clearer than in its first season. In fact, when I first saw the show, their story left such a bad taste in my mouth that I put off watching the 2nd and 3rd seasons for a long time after they came out. And while I definitely enjoyed the later seasons more, I still can't go back to the first season without my blood boiling all over again. Season 1 follows the characters of Miss Daphne Bridgerton and Simon, Duke of Hastings, who hold very different views and desires when it comes to marriage and children. Daphne's greatest desire is to be a wife and a mother, while Simon has sworn off marriage and children as a last f*** you to his abusive father, who used Simon's mother as a breeding machine, only to mistreat his son after he was actually born. Now, when it comes to Simon's mother, Sarah, the show seems to want to have its cake and eat it too, as it rightfully sets up her being designated to the role of broodmare as a bad thing, while at the same time holding up having children as the key to happiness for all of its characters. The show could have easily added in dialogue or a flashback scene that rounded her out as a person, showing us the hopes and dreams which she never got to achieve because she was so busy trying to produce an heir for her husband. But the show can't do that because that would actually give weight to Simon's reservations about reproduction and parenthood, which it's ultimately going to dismiss entirely. I've already done an entire video about the child-free turned parent trope, which I'll link down below if you haven't seen it. But one of the biggest problems I have with the trope is that it sets up child-free people as individuals who are too broken or traumatized by bad childhoods to actually want children of their own. But the second they recover from those wounds, they'll change their minds and be much happier for it. Obviously, this is not true. Many child-free people, myself included, had very good childhoods, but simply don't want the responsibility of raising children for themselves. That said, there are people out there whose childhood trauma does play a role in their decision to be child-free, and here's the thing about that. That choice also needs to be respected. Because despite what shows like Bridgerton would have you believe, trauma does not get resolved through one conversation. It can take years and even a lifetime to overcome, and if someone has decided that they don't want to risk pushing that same trauma onto children of their own, then I commend them for making such a responsible choice. Bridgerton would have us believe that Simon isn't actually happy being child-free, though, and that he's actually trapped in a prison of his own making by denying himself a family. But despite that claim, we're never actually shown any evidence of that being the case. We never see Simon looking longingly at happy families, or making a secret confession to someone that he would actually love to have children of his own. Maybe if he had, Season 1's ending would have worked a lot better. The most we get, though, is a scene where he entertains Daphne's younger siblings, and all that really tells us is that Simon's good with kids. Plenty of people who don't want kids are still good with them. That information does nothing to help the show's case. If anything, everything we see suggests that Simon is perfectly happy living a child-free life, and only has a child later to make Daphne happy. And that's another common myth that this trope is so fond of pushing, that child-free people will change their mind once they meet the right person. The truth is otherwise. If you're child-free, the right person won't want kids either. And perpetuating this lie that all we need is true love to want a kid can inadvertently lead to people staying in relationships for much longer than they should, because they think their partner will come around eventually. And who knows, maybe they'll even succeed in talking them into having kids. which, if you ask me, is fertile ground for resentment to grow, as even the most stable of relationships can be tested by the hard work required for parenthood. So if by chance you're someone watching this who thinks they might be able to talk your reluctant partner into kids, do yourselves both a favor and don't. Speaking of which, let's talk about Daphne in this show. At one point, she's presented with a choice. Go after Simon, with whom she shares a passionate connection, but their goals don't align. Or marry the prince, who shares her life goals, but she doesn't feel the same passion for. I hear a lot of people say that she should have married the prince, and I get why, but I actually think she should have gone with the secret third option, which was to ditch both Simon and the prince, and instead look for someone she feels passionately for, but who also shares her desires for a family. Instead, she goes with Simon, even after he tells her he can't have children. And just to be clear, I do think this was a dick move on his part. He really should have been upfront with her from the start about not wanting children, instead of misleading her into believing it was a physical problem, and then taking advantage of her lack of sexual education to perpetuate the lie. For a while there, I actually had some sympathy for Daphne. But then she finds out the truth, and instead of confronting him about it, she pins him down and forces him to finish inside of her, even though he clearly doesn't want to and is trying to get away. Make no mistake about it, this is rape and reproductive abuse, something Law & Order SVU literally did an entire episode about. And if the genders were reversed, there's no way this scene would have aired without some kind of warning beforehand. This is one scene I know for a fact is worse in the book, and it honestly boggles my mind that what we see in the show is the sanitized version. This very obviously leads to a rift in Simon and Daphne's relationship, although not nearly as big of one as there should have been, honestly. Because Simon's the guy and Daphne's the girl, I guess it doesn't matter that she forced him into a sexual act he wasn't comfortable with, and tricked him into potentially siring a baby she knew he didn't want. Because while Daphne had previously agreed to life without children, suddenly she can never be happy without one. And the show somehow thinks this justifies her actions. This was the point of no return for Daphne's character for me. In fact, the third season is my favorite, at least in part because she's not in it. But the show proceeds to sweep all of this under the rug, and only a year later, Simon and Daphne are living happily ever after with their new baby boy. And because this is a fiction show, we can assume everything will be fine from now on. However, if this was real life, I wouldn't hold high hopes for their marriage going forward. As for the later seasons, I don't actually have a problem with Anthony and Kate or Colin and Penelope having children, because none of those characters ever expressed a desire to remain child-free. However, I am worried about what the show will do to Eloise in the future. She's the only other character besides Simon who has openly stated that she doesn't want children. In fact, she's had quite a few lines that I find really relatable.
How did she become a child if she's not married?
I do not know. I will find out.
You must. Otherwise, how can we make sure it never happens to us?
However, the show frames Eloise as being too young and naive to know what she really wants. Another common myth when it comes to child-free people. Once they mature, they'll change their minds. And because of that, I worry that when the time comes, the show will have her abandon her child-free stance as well, and only further cement its messaging of marriage plus kids equals a happy ending. And before anyone comes into my comments and cries, "Oh, but they all have to have kids, it's historically accurate," you don't have a leg to stand on, okay? This show has already taken more than a few liberties when it comes to historical accuracy, and I think everyone in their right mind knows that. Actually, through the blending of the Regency period and modern day, the show is in a position to really take these old-fashioned ideas and break down why they're harmful to women and society at large. I just don't have any faith that it'll actually do that in any meaningful way. I still wish Season 1 had driven home even harder why a lack of sexual education can be so detrimental. Instead, they leave it at one scene where Daphne confronts her mother, and don't give us any evidence that Violet has actually changed her ways when it comes to her other daughters. In fact, women's lack of knowledge about their own bodies and health continues to be used as a joke even into the later seasons. In conclusion, I can still enjoy Bridgerton as a piece of entertainment, but I don't want anyone to ignore the fact that it has also pushed some rather insulting and even harmful messaging. And for anyone wondering why it's so important that we start seeing more examples of child-free people in media, seeing something on screen, especially over and over, normalizes it. Sometimes I wish that weren't the case, but it does. And in a world where Donald Trump was just re-elected to the White House, along with J.D. Vance, who seems to have some kind of vendetta against anyone without biological children, we badly need more representation, so that we can all start to become more accepting of each other's life choices, even if they might not be our own. I think I'll end things there for today. Thanks for listening, everyone. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment with your thoughts down below. Until next time, stay brilliant, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.